Hello, my name is Carolina Duque, and I'll be making another video for my sociology class. Our topic is social change and environment, and I'll be answering 4 questions. Question number 1. Society has changed over the past decade, from style to language, and even our environmental resources. Give an example of how social change has affected physical environment, population, innovation, diffusion, and mass media. A social change is an appreciable alteration of social structures. The consequences and manifestations of these structures link to norms, values, and processes. Social change and the physical environment. The processes of transformation of nature by man has been altering the composition of populations, the regularity of matter cycles, energy flows, and with it, all the dynamic balance of the natural system. The simplest form of society's relationship with nature is in which man collects from the environment what he needs to survive. Subsequently, it no longer collects, but through tools, instruments, and machines acts on nature. Tools and technologies are becoming increasingly complex and with great transformation power to the point that they can be counterproductive for society. For example, the use of DDT in agriculture that can reach toxic concentration levels that affect the health of the population. Social changes and population. Currently, population surpluses or groups seeking to improve their situation move to another northern countries in search of work for a better salary than in their country of origin and in which they and their families can progress. These migratory movements also have malignant effects such as mafias that traffic with people for the labor market and prostitution. At the same time, countries that have improved their economic outlook become more demanding, which implies more consumption of energy, food, and products that causes the destruction of the ecosystem. Social change and innovation. When the car was invented, it was probably not true about the negative implications it will have in the future, such as air pollution, noise, loss of public space, climate change, and accidents. Therefore, it is necessary to rethink innovation, integrating social aspects, and thus accommodate the concept of social innovation, that is the process of development and delivery of effective solutions to social and environmental problems. Social change and diffusion. In some places or countries, there has been a progressive diffusion of the urban in rural areas. The socioeconomic and cultural conditions of rural areas are increasingly related to the more or less nearby cities with which they maintain an exchange or functional dependence. This diffusion of the urban has been especially encouraged by several factors such as the reevaluation of rural space and adequate environment to live, find the cheaper land to build, and the increasing physical and social deterioration of urban centers. This diffusion is not limited to physical expansion, but also the socioeconomic and cultural division. Such changes contribute to improving the living conditions of the rural population, achieving a social change in this area. Social change and mass media. The role of mass media in society has had positive and negative impacts. Some of the positive impacts are an increased level of awareness, the development of public opinion, promotes education activity, supports public issues and affairs. Some of the negative impacts are consumerism, false information, manipulation of people. Nevertheless, the media is an important instrument to be used in continuous efforts to improve people's quality of life. Question number 2. The information revolution was and still is an important perspective in social change. In your opinion, how has it changed society and how do you feel it will change society in the future? Internet is the decisive technology of the information age in the same way that the electric motor was the vector of technological transformation during the industrial era. This global network of computers, which currently operates primarily through wireless communication platforms, provides us with the ubiquity of multimodal and interactive communications and at any time and free of spatial limits. It produces significant changes in culture as social behavior. New organization forms of economic activity, politics, and social life are achieved with the internet. Network technologies are used for business purposes, marketing, e-commerce, teaching, creativity, culture, media, interacting with friends and family, medical applications, leisure, and social political activism. Information technologies constitute the central core of a multidimensional transformation experienced by the economy and society, and the dominance of the influence that such transformation imposes the human being as a social entity, since it tends to modify its behavior patterns, including its way of thinking. Thanks to the internet, the last 2 decades are probably the ones that have introduced the most changes in our way of living and thinking in the history of mankind. Question number 3. How has modernization changed many underdeveloped nations? Modernization not only emphasizes the process of change, but also the responses to it. Modernization analyzes the internal dynamics of social and cultural structures and the adaptation of new technologies. In the mid-20th century, economic development began to seen as global to be achieved in Latin America. The modern was associated with full economic development. In the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s, Latin America became aware of the difficulties and obstacles that impeded access to modernity. Concepts of postmodernity and globalizations appeared in the 1990s, which were associated with the theme of modernity and modernization, which were the growing global trends. Modernity and modernization processes that occur in Latin America to the European model as a reference. Latin America's modernization has had its ups and downs depending on the changing social, economic, and political circumstances, or public policies in education and budget shortages. Question number 4. What are the types of social movements that have occurred in the history? When and why did they occur? A social movement pursues a specific objective and strives to achieve it through a specific action plan. These movements express people's demands. The types of movements that have occurred in the history are revolutionary movements, reform movements, resistance movements, and expressive movements. Revolutionary movements. A revolutionary movement seeks to overthrow the existing social system and replace it with a greatly different one. Revolutionary movements flourish where reform is blocked so that revolution remains the people's only alternative to their present. Some examples are the Internationalist Revolutionary Movement, a communist international organization that supports Marxism, Leninism, and Maoism. The Conservative Revolutionary Movement was a movement of German nationalist conservatism in the years following the First World War. Some of the armed revolutionary movements in Latin America are the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, and the National Liberation Army, ELN, the Shining Path, and the Revolutionary Tupac Amaru movement. Reform movement. A reform movement is a type of social movement that aims to bring a social or political system closer to the community's ideal. These tend to be political, religious, economical, or educational. A reform movement advocates a change that will preserve the existing values but will provide improved means of implementing them. The movements to preserve wildlife or the ones to control population growth are reform movements. Resistance movements. The resistance movement is an effort to block a proposed change or to uproot a change already achieved. These groups are also dedicated to opposing an invader in an occupied country or a government of a sovereign state. They achieve their goals through nonviolent resistance, sometimes called civil resistance, or through the use of force. The term resistance is generally used to designate a movement considered illegitimate. Expressive movement. When people are faced with a social system from which they cannot flee and which they feel powerless to change, the result is an expressive social movement. In an expressive social movement, the individual comes to terms with an unpleasant external reality by modifying his reactions to that reality. The individual tries to ignore the miserable present and fixes his gaze upon glorious future. The hippie movement is an expressive social movement. The new social movements, NSM, emerged in the second half of the 70s. They are directed to interests such as cultures, recognition of individuals and society identity, the environment, justice, and promotion from the human rights. Some of the new social movements are counterculture groups, environmentalism, feminism, immigrants, consumer protection, LGBT, transsexuality. The most recent is the anti-globalization movement. This is all I have. Thank you, and I hope you all enjoyed this video.